Welcome back to another edition of the Creator Spotlight. This week I have the founder of Dry Atlas, Victoria Waters, with me today. How are you, Victoria?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, could you tell us a little bit about, what inspired you to start Dry Atlas and get going?
Sure. My husband and I have been involved in the non-alcoholic beverage space for 4 years now. He opened America's first booze-free bottle shop in New York City, which we still own and operate today. After running that store in New York City for a couple of years, we had a front row seat to watching the alcohol alternative space really flourish and even explode. And we thought that there was a great opportunity to bring our expertise beyond New York City and really express the growth and the value of this category to drinkers worldwide. And we thought the best way to do that was with a media company. So we launched Dry Atlas last summer as a media company focused on all things alcohol alternatives and really getting into the news and the insights behind this space, in addition to being really passionate about the individual products, which we continue to do across the store and Dry Atlas as a media company.
Yeah, and I think I've been following you guys for probably about 6 months or so now. So I wasn't quite there at the beginning, but I have been following along. And with that, I've seen you exploring the world and traveling pretty extensively, exploring all these non-alcoholic options worldwide. So through the digital nomad life and traveling and trying all these different products, what are some of the most interesting cultural differences that you've observed in drinking habits and then in non-alcoholic beverages?
People like to think of the US as being on the cutting edge of most innovation, but I have to hand it to both Europe and Asia on this front for different reasons. As part of our year abroad, we spent over a year across Europe, Asia, and Central America, meeting with producers, meeting with other folks in the industry, and we were blown away by how much innovation is happening outside of the US. It's particularly interesting to see what's happening in Europe, where if you're familiar with non-alcoholic spirits, wines, and beers, a lot of this innovation did come out of the United Kingdom to
Hmm.
start. So, of course, one of the most famous early brands, Seedlip,
Yeah.
is from the UK. And you've got, I think, in Europe, more of an acceptance of non-alcoholic options as a norm. Meaning, for example, you're more likely to see a non-alcoholic beer integrated in a broader menu. You're more likely to see Copenhagen, for example, this concept of gastronomic beverages that are really complex, fermented blends that are for a wine-like occasion, but not necessarily trying to disrupt or challenge the wine industry. So I would say in Europe, culturally, I was interested to see just how much more nuanced I think the space was. And it was really just more subtly integrated into the broader beverage category. I think in the US, we have a bit of this non-alc versus alc, big alc and the problems with big alc. And while I do personally think it's important to shine a light on that side of
Hmm.
things, I did appreciate that a lot of what was happening in Europe was enjoy these alternatives as a great option that you can alternate between. And then in Asia, we loved meeting with producers of premium teas. Of course, we associate Asia with tea, but I think very few people in America think beyond a black tea or a green tea. I'm half British, so I've always been deep into the tea world. And the Asian producers are taking tea to a whole new level and really building products that can stand against a champagne, for example, at a top tier restaurant for a celebratory occasion. So in the tea space specifically, we love to see what the Asian producers were doing. And we're pleasantly surprised in countries like Japan, for example, where we spent 1 month, to see that in a country that is so associated with heavy drinking, actually there were more non-alcoholic or low ABV options there than in any of the countries we visited. So I think it's an important reminder that from the US, you might have a picture of what one region or country is doing, and on the ground, it can feel quite different.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot there, and what I'm really excited about, I have not personally had an opportunity to try yet, seeing as they're just doing pre-orders. I think yesterday they started, but Ben Branson, founder of Seedlib, his new distillery that he opened up, Silva, that I'm really excited to try those products. And then you also mentioned the menus in Europe and Japan as well, having the options. Was it your experience in these places that it went beyond the standard, at least here in the US, or at least where I am in Florida, where it's more than just the one standard, like here's an NA beer, it's on the menu for the sake of having it on the menu, but there's not really the same experience of going to a bar and be like, oh, I think I'm feeling a beer tonight, or I want a cocktail, and having those options while you were abroad, or was it kind of similar to America?
You're spot on. I think there was a little bit more care in Asia and Europe as far as that menu incorporation goes. I will say in America, one thing I do love to see is that you will see a non-alc Heineken or an athletic beer available at, virtually every venue that I've been to across the state since I've been back. But I would like to see the American hospitality scene follow, especially what we've seen in Europe in terms of the craft and the appreciation for the craft. We had a great interview with a European no and low investor in Dry Atlas this week, Roman, who runs an angels syndicate called Ace of Cups. And I'm bullish on how he views this space in terms of these beverages can be complex, sophisticated, wonderful gastronomic creations that stand on their own, not as a less than alternative to the real deal. And you mentioned Ben Branson. We interviewed him for Dry Atlas late last year, and he and I have stayed close as he's built Season, his bitters brand, and now Silva, his latest creation. And he says that the alcohol alternatives brands of the future that will succeed are ones that focus more on what you're getting from it and out of it, and not on the absence of alcohol. So I think that's a really important thing to think about if you're building a brand. But I think as a consumer of the brand, you want to think about what are the benefits and the enjoyment of this product, not, I don't want to drink that much, so now I have to have this, mocktail, which feels less than.
Yeah. And, many people, obviously struggle with the social pressure around drinking or they just, struggle with alcohol abuse as well. So what strategies have you found helpful for navigating the social situations without alcohol, and any advice for people that maybe want to consume a little bit less?
Sure. So I think for people who haven't explored alcohol alternatives at all, they might be surprised to see how much of the socializing and drinking ritual is really about just that, and not so much about the ABV content of what is in your glass. I'm no scientist, but we have done some research here at Dry Atlas on the psychology behind drinking, and even the act of holding a cocktail glass, no matter what's in it, triggers a lot of interesting benefits in your brain as far as socializing and connection go. You can feel part of the group. We as humans always want to feel part of the group. That's how we're safe. So I would encourage people who think that they need to have an alcoholic drink to have fun to just try and experiment with some sophisticated alcohol alternatives and see how you do feel. Maybe you don't actually need that buzz. Maybe you feel part of the group and celebratory and happy enough if you've got something that's better than just a run-of-the-mill seltzer water. And then my second tip would pertain more to your audience. I am very bullish on THC infused beverages. I think a misnomer, or a misconception rather, about the alcohol alternative space is that everyone in this space is anti-substance or 100% pro-sobriety. And while I lead a mostly alcohol-free life myself, I wouldn't identify as sober. And certainly THC, I think, is a great thing to explore if you are specifically looking for something to unwind, but you maybe are feeling that alcohol doesn't fit into your lifestyle anymore for whatever reason. So I would say a lot of the experts we interview for Dry Atlas are viewing infused cocktails, infused products as a viable wine alternative, for example. So if you're looking to cut back, it could be an interesting place to consider in your daily ritual or your weekly ritual that still gives you some kind of state change.
Yeah, and you said something very interesting there that really resonated with me personally as I've kind of gone on this journey as well, is that it's the ritual of one, socializing, and then two, making a cocktail and things like that, kind of helped me realize that it was never about the alcohol. And I've never had an issue with alcohol in any capacity, but it was really, I went for a run, I'm meeting some friends, we're going to sit outside on the first warm day of spring or whatever, and crack open a beer. That was, really important to me. Or it's the end of the night, I wanted to go through and, combine a bunch of ingredients and make the cocktail and then sit down and relax. It was always about those things more so than the actual alcohol. So for me, in my personal journey was, okay, I'm going to start with these NA beers, and then the infused beverages kind of got in there as well. It was 3 months that I hadn't had any alcohol, and I didn't miss it at all. So, that's really resonated with me, what you said there. But, you also alluded there to, these beverages that can provide something besides just not having alcohol.
Mhm.
So besides that, or if you want to expand on that as well, where do you see the non-alcoholic beverage industry, heading in the next 5 or 10 years?
I would say in line with Ben Branson of Seedlip and Roman of Ace of Cups, who I mentioned, I really see a move toward craft and a move toward emphasizing the ingredients of the beverage, how it was made, and really having the non alcoholic aspect of it be one of many features. So, for example, Ben always says, and I agree, that he'd like to see the zero point 0.5 or zero point 0.0 ABV move to the back of the label, right next to where you might see vegan or organic certified. Some people counter that and say, hey, it's really important that we be super clear on what is alcoholic or what is not. Same with THC. You don't want someone who is pregnant or has other
Yeah.
concerns accidentally enjoying a beverage that doesn't fit with their current state. That said, I think from a brand and marketing perspective and to help the category grow, it would behoove more products to focus more on what the beverage is actually offering and less on its non or its zilch or its zero. You see a lot of brands that center on that, which maybe in phase one of this space growing makes more sense. But as it evolves, I think it'll just become much more normalized and there's no need to emphasize it or defend it or apologize for it. So along those lines, I'm bullish on very thoughtfully made craft beverages, the premium teas, for example, that I saw in Asia. I think there are a lot of brands entering this space. It's at least one a day that we track here at Dry Atlas. We've got a directory of every brand on the market. It's probably now 1,600 plus true alcohol alternatives. It was about 900 last year when we first started
Oh,
tracking.
wow.
So it would behoove, I think, more brands to focus on that craft. I think at the same time, it's capitalism. You're going to have people come in and see the market opportunity. They might be white labeling a non-alc wine or white labeling a seltzer. But in the THC space, especially, I'm really bullish on those who are focusing on the craft of the beverage. I think
Hmm.
a good example, and we were talking about this earlier, is Ben Kennedy from Fable. Certainly, you can find a co-packer, producers, white labelers to do an infused seltzer, but someone like a Ben from Fable is really focusing on drinks that can be at the craft level to be a true cocktail alternative, not just THC as a commodity that is more appealing than ethanol for some.
Yeah, that kind of goes into the next question. We're seeing the growing interest in THC infused beverages and how that trend intersects with the non-alc movement. And we'll get into that question here in a second. But another interesting conversation I have with a lot of folks is around, THC being just an ingredient and not the main selling point of the drink. It's, yes, there's THC in it, but it's more about the broader effect that it can give you. And it's not about necessarily, getting sunk into the couch or going to the moon or anything like that. It's about how can this fit into a broader lifestyle.
Yep.
So, as we talk about that, and then, again, the growing interest of these beverages, how do you think this trend of, THC and food beverages intersects with the non-alc movement as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's very important for those beverage brands to focus on the role of their products as an alcohol alternative if
Mm-hmm.
they are looking to get the audience of consumers who are not existing or habitual cannabis consumers. I think those folks, can get their edibles, they can get other delivery mechanisms that are less about the specific enjoyment of something as an alcohol alternative. I think anything in beverage format is helpful for that adoption and lowering the stigma. I think you'd be harder pressed to find like a 30 or 40 something mom who is looking to smoke something, for example, but
Yeah.
something's in a can. That's a familiar format to people. It's really easy. It's also discreet for those who don't necessarily want to put on blast what they're consuming and why not alcohol. So I really see these trends intersecting. I think when you look at the growth of the non-alcoholic beverage category, inclusive of non-psychoactive or non-functional beverages, it's really reflecting broader changes in how particularly Americans these days are viewing the impact of alcohol on their health. If you're curious about this topic, Gallup does some great surveys, and often Gallup is directly comparing how Americans view alcohol versus marijuana. It's really interesting to view some of their more recent data that Americans view marijuana as less harmful to health than
Yep.
alcohol, which, if anyone, I'm in my early 30s, if you grew up with the campaigns of this is your brain on drugs, with the eggs frying in the frying pan, I definitely grew up with a much more negative view of THC and alcohol at that point being quite normalized. Even when I was
Yes.
very young, cigarettes being normalized before bans in restaurants, I still remember those days. So
Same.
I think when it's the status quo, people think it'll go on forever, but I remind them cigarettes used to be much more normalized. I think alcohol will go closer to the way of cigarettes. And at the same time, I think attitudes toward THC will continue to become more positive. I'm not a health expert and I probably can't say, hey, this is perfect compared to alcohol. But again, here at Dry Atlas, we're trying to show all of the options you have aside from alcohol and not really make any judgments personally on what's perfect for you or what's best for your health plan. But I do think health is a big element of it for particularly Americans. And that's why we'll see a much broader appetite for THC as an alcohol alternative. And I think beverages will be the best delivery mechanism for that.
I agree. It's interesting. You hear a lot from policymakers and politicians and things around, how THC beverages can be, marketed towards kids or edibles can be marketed towards kids. And a lot of the rules focus on that a lot.
Yeah.
But then you have, big alcohol and not to make, an enemy of big alcohol or anything like that, but you have products that are very clearly targeted towards kids, whether it be clothing and that's being sold in Hot Topic or wherever, that it's a double-sided coin there that they don't have to follow the same rules essentially.
Yeah.
And it's rough out there for THC beverages when they don't want to market, the good actors don't want to market towards kids. They want to market towards adults, but yeah, that's the number one battle cry of policymakers often.
And I see where they're coming from, and certainly we have to keep children away
Mm-hmm.
from products. At the same time, I think you hit the nail on the head. Alcohol has been so normalized. You think about sports sponsorships with alcohol companies behind Formula One, and I just think, you've got a lot of children watching, whether it's the Olympics, Formula One, Super Bowl, and you wouldn't imagine ever in our lifetime that THC beverages could be there, but maybe they will be soon. And I
Hopefully.
would just remind policymakers that we have the infrastructure for controlled substances. We have rules and regulations for alcohol. I think while it's not a perfectly comparable substance, we can use a lot of the same structures to make sure that we are appropriately keeping consumers safe should they need to be safe from these topics and these products. And I would say the same thing to social media companies.
Mm-hmm.
They are also quite strict on alcohol, but it is difficult to get the message out about cannabis as an alcohol alternative when it's so easy to get flagged and shadow banned for content like that, which is why I really appreciate efforts like yours to reach people via other mediums than social media as well.
Yeah. So sticking in line with the social media side of things, have you seen in your experience with these non-alcoholic beverage companies, are they getting flagged in similar ways as big alcohol would with advertising?
Yes, it's very frustrating, probably not as frustrating as the experience any THC beverage founders are having. But I
Mm-hmm.
do remember for our retail store, Spirited Away, when we were doing some Facebook shop type setup things, we
Mm-hmm.
kept getting flagged for alcohol. And it's just so ironic, obviously, because we exist to help people have an alternative to it. But I get it. It's, same thing with TikTok. We're very active on TikTok. And I think a lot of the times the bots that are reviewing the content don't see the
Yep.
nuance of, hey, we're talking about non-alcoholic tequila, or hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about educating consumers about the differences in health impact between alcohol and cannabis. We're not here shilling any particular product, but that's just the game you're in. And I understand why the media companies need to moderate. But at the same time, I hope that processes get introduced so that at least we would see THC beverages handled similarly to how alcohol is handled.
Yeah, it's interesting with that as well because I used to live in the state of Indiana, and for a long time you couldn't buy alcohol on Sundays.
Hmm.
That rule changed, and you could do it, but it has to be, I think, after noon, I think. before you're allowed to buy it. And when I was living here, I went to go buy some non-alcoholic beer. And it was like, I don't know, 10 a.m. or something on a Sunday. And I was going to a friend's house to watch some football, and I wasn't allowed to buy it
Hmm.
because technically it's alcohol,
Yep.
even though there's no alcohol in it. I was like, this makes no sense. So some of the laws just don't make common sense. So that's frustrating. Same thing with social media. So, what would be, if my listeners or subscribers would like to, learn more about Dry Atlas, learn more about, any of the projects that you're working on, what would be the best way for them to, follow and support your work?
Well, thank you for that. Anyone who's interested in alcohol alternatives can go to dryatlas.com. That's where we house all of our content, as well as an easy way to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter that covers non-alcoholic news, insights, and recommendations every Wednesday. So dryatlas.com to subscribe to the newsletter is the best way to stay up to date with everything we are covering.
So, well, thank you so much for your time today, Victoria. Until next time, guys. Cheers.
Thank you.